Reduction Act and changes to the marital leasing program through that piece of legislation. We're honored to have Matt. Okay, now we're recording. Okay, now Matt Leggett. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Please correct me. But who's the Chief Counsel for the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee. So welcome, sir, to our Select Committee here in the Wyoming Legislature. I look forward to your update on this matter.
Chairman Bonner, thank you for the opportunity, and also thank you to Chairman Burkhart and other members of the committee for having me today. And I'm happy to provide you with an update on the Inflation Reduction Act. As you mentioned, I'm currently the Chief Counsel of the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I work under Ranking Member John Barrasso. Previously, I was Chief Counsel of the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee under then Chairman John Barrasso, and have been with the ranking member / chairman for the past decade, doing energy, environment, natural resources issues. So have had the very good fortune of working for Wyoming during that time. I guess am here to update you on the Inflation Reduction Act specifically, but I think more generally, the 117th Congress and its impacts on federal lands and natural resources under federal control. As you all have seen over the past 2 years, we have had a White House controlled by President Biden, a Senate controlled by the Democrats, and a House controlled by the Democrats. With that, and the Senate has been controlled by the narrowest of margins, with a 50-50 makeup, going to the president's party because the vice president serves as president of the Senate. Under that unilateral Democrat control, we've seen $5 trillion in spending. Some of that spending has been bipartisan, most recently with the Inflation Reduction Act. An additional $750 billion was along purely partisan lines, that spending, in particular with regard to the Inflation Reduction Act, has had and will continue to have, as it's implemented, major ramifications for natural resources, and in particular natural resources on federal lands. The Biden administration and the congressional Democrats have made it no secret that they would like to very rapidly and very aggressively transition the economy to energy derived from renewables as opposed to fossil fuels. That clearly has a lot of ramifications for a state like Wyoming and other energy-rich states. And in the Inflation Reduction Act, of the $750 billion, about $369 billion was dedicated to the Democrats' sort of wish list for the transition to non-fossil energy. That includes major increases in costs to fossil fuel producers. It includes significant funding opportunities for renewable energy and alternative forms of energy. It also includes, I think, as the act is implemented, a lot of additional regulatory red tape that is going to be layered on top of the fossil industry. And I'll just run through specifically some provisions that I think will have major ramifications for Wyoming and sort of the fossil energy sector writ large. The Inflation Reduction Act includes the first fee tax or charge ever assessed on greenhouse gas emissions through statute, and that fee is on methane emissions. And for the first 2 years, it's the equivalent of about $36 per metric ton of carbon equivalent. It rises to $60 per metric ton of carbon equivalent after the first 2 years, and continues on at that rate in perpetuity. That would be a significant additional cost on any methane emissions coming from oil and gas production, in addition to transportation, distribution, utilization. On top of that, the Inflation Reduction Act raised fees in many ways on oil and gas production on federal lands, both onshore and offshore. With regard to offshore oil and gas leasing, it increased the minimum royalty rate by 33.4, between 33.4% and 50%. For federal onshore oil and gas royalty rates, it increased those rates by 33.4% for regular leases and 60% for reinstated leases. For federal onshore oil and gas minimum bids, those were increased by 400%. Federal onshore oil and gas lease annual rental rates were increased by 100% in the first and second year, 233% in the third, fourth, and fifth years, 150% in the sixth, seventh, and eighth year, and by 650% in each subsequent year. Royalties on all extracted methane. In addition, the Inflation Reduction Act creates a new royalty on all extracted methane produced from onshore and offshore federal lands. That will include things like venting and flaring. For the first time, royalties will be assessed on venting and flaring, for example, from natural gas operations. The Inflation Reduction Act created a new expression of interest fee at the cost of $5 per acre, subject to adjustment in the future for inflation. The Inflation Reduction Act also changed the regulatory structure a bit surrounding these oil and gas leases. For example, it eliminated the ability to have non-competitive leasing, and it actually attempted to expand bonding requirements, but we successfully were able to fight that off during the reconciliation process. And so those are the major sort of additional costs added to kind of the federal mineral estate and production from it. There are also other provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act that would impact Wyoming specifically, and whether directly or indirectly. When it comes to coal, there's an energy infrastructure reinvestment financing program, which is funded at $5 billion in order to support $250 billion in loan guarantees to help power plants transition from coal and from fossil fuels and towards either a combination of kind of natural gas and CCS, or we believe the real intent of the provision is to incentivize people to shut those plants down so that they can then build renewable plants with that money. So we were opposed to all of these items, very opposed to that. A few of the good things that have come out of this is increased investment in carbon capture and sequestration, research, development, deployment, which we obviously are very supportive of. I guess I'll just make a few more remarks. As we, I want to stress that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in the most partisan of ways. The Democrats did start with sort of a $4 trillion price tag last year. That was negotiated down to $750 billion. We consider that a success. We certainly consider the role we played as playing as being meaningful in that process. not only directly by shining the light on some major spending that would be bad for Wyoming that subsequently was taken out, but also to the extent we were able to, supporting Senator Manchin, who is the chairman of our committee, at hearings, in meetings, et cetera, to the extent we could, with regard to his efforts to pare that bill down. We clearly, like every Republican, we're fully opposed to the $750 billion in spending. As that money is distributed and implemented, I would just note that that it was created through the budget reconciliation in the process, which in the Senate, which is a process really meant to reconcile the budget in small ways and to reduce spending. It's now been sort of reversed to support spending, and it's been blown wide open by the Inflation Reduction Act for the future. And we believe, although this has not been fully tested yet, we believe that anything that gets done through reconciliation can be undone through reconciliation. Now, President Biden will be in office for the next 2 years, so I don't expect that any provision from the Inflation Reduction Act will actually be repealed through the reconciliation process going forward. Certainly, the Senate, if in Republican control, may have the opportunity to use the reconciliation process to at least put provisions that the Senate under Republican control would like to repeal on the president's desk. But after 2 years is up, depending on who controls the White House and the Congress, the process could always be used to come back and revisit some of these provisions. You will also have quite a bit of regulation that comes out of the Inflation Reduction Act in order to implement it. The methane charge is a great example. The Environmental Protection Agency, which is not under our committee's jurisdiction, but obviously is very important in this conversation, is going to have to figure out how to assess that charge and go through all the regulatory sort of hoops to make sure it's done fairly, and so I would expect a lot of action on that front. Certainly, with regard to the assessment of a fee on all methane extracted from federal lands or royalty, that will absolutely need a vigorous regulatory process to implement. To our knowledge, royalties are assessed on an end product, such as a barrel of oil, or a cubic foot of gas, or whatever the metric is. You need that end product to be able to assess that fee. You don't have that end product when it comes to venting and flaring, for example. In order to quantify that venting and flaring, you're going to need reliable emissions monitoring systems. You're going to need to come up with a regulatory structure to sort of control that and to capture that in a quantifiable way so that you can assess a royalty on that. So those are just kind of two examples. Going forward, there will also be quite a bit of oversight with regard to the implementation of these programs, with regard to the implementation of this funding. I would expect that if Republicans control the Congress next year, you will see that oversight be a lot more aggressive than if the Democrats controlled Congress. Certainly, I think you'll also, we hope, see the media play a role in that. I don't know to what extent the committee remembers Solyndra, which was a $500 million investment under the Obama administration through the Department of Energy Loan Guarantee Program to support a solar manufacturer. That became the poster child for the distribution of this kind of money and sort of the malfeasance that surrounded it. And ultimately, in that case, not only was the company a failure domestically and a black eye for the Department of Energy's loan guarantee program, but it ended up providing technology to China that China otherwise would not have. And so I think that you will see a lot of oversight going forward on that front. With that, I hope that was a good sort of summary of the Inflation Reduction Act, and in particular its impacts on minerals and on Wyoming. I'm happy to take any questions or talk any further about anything else.
Okay, well, thank you for that very good overview, Matt. Appreciate it, and appreciate the work that you do on behalf of Senator Barrasso, making it be much better than otherwise would have been had we not fought back and to the extent which you did. So, any questions, committee, on that update right now? Right now, so I was just curious, was there anything dealing with nuclear power and that changed with that piece of legislation? I know that there's a couple moving parts here, especially in Wyoming when it comes to small modular reactors. Just wondering if there's anything that changed for nuclear as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act.
There's additional financial opportunities to support the nuclear industry and the nuclear build out of small modular reactors. And we are very excited about nuclear and what is happening in Wyoming on that front. I know Senator Barrasso, has been very involved, and we hope to continue to see great success in the state for that. And yes, there is financial support for that in the Inflation Reduction Act. I would note, though, that that when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act as a whole, it is very clearly, focused on renewable energy, and so it does have benefits to CCUS and to nuclear. But by and large, its focus on non-baseload energy right now sort of overwhelms those benefits, certainly from a comprehensive analysis.
Okay, very good. As somebody who represents Glen Rock in particular, there's a lot of uncertainty about Dave Johnson and just what exactly the plan is moving forward. So far, we haven't heard from the utility what exactly they plan on, if they are going to shut down the plant, and that they're intent on doing that, what the replacement is. And in terms of reliable sources of energy, I think nuclear stands out as one of the leading contenders if we're going to have a resilient grid. So appreciate your work along those lines. You also mentioned briefly the increased incentives for carbon capture. And just go a little bit more detail as to what those are. It's my understanding there's a per ton tax credit, if I remember correctly. Could you just maybe go a little bit more detail as to what changed there? Because I think that's also something that's going to be important for many industries, from oil and gas to coal, as a way to bridge those reliable, effective sources of power and if we can continue to leverage those, I think that's, carbon capture is going to be a very important part of that. So if you can just do a little bit more detail as to what way that changed and maybe what you see the impact being.
Sure. Well, the IRA creates an energy infrastructure reinvestment financing program, which I mentioned before. It's funded at $5.25 billion in loan guarantees available, and that's for power plants to transition, to cleaner forms of energy, and included within that can be CCUS. And our expectation is that the majority of that funding and the majority of the loan guarantee portfolio being administered by this administration will likely focus on replacements to fossil generation as opposed to improvements to fossil generation. That being said, CCUS is an available technology under that program, and so a plant could seek to improve its environmental performance through that. Now, with regard to the tax credit, there's something called the 45Q tax credit, which is the IRA basically just increases and expands. the value of it. So it basically just brings more money to the table than it otherwise would, under statute previously, and that's a big victory, we think. Going forward, CCUS, we think it is promising. It is well positioned. We think if there's any technology that needs government support, it's that, to get it over the hump. But to truly have an economy that's low carbon, but also that operates as we know it to operate today, you have to have baseload energy. And that baseload energy absolutely will increasingly be nuclear, but it also is going to require, as far as the eye can see, fossils. And to the extent that fossil fuels play a part, in this country, but also in other countries, in particular developing countries overseas, CCUS is going to be a technology that becomes more and more necessary to the extent people want to achieve a low carbon future.
Okay, thank you very much, committee. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Matt, for your time. We very much appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that you do. And Senator Barrasso, of course, please, we appreciate all that he does for us and making something that could have been completely terrible, less terrible, and even finding maybe a few things that, dare I say it, that might help out here when it comes to our energy picture. So appreciate your work. Certainly under no impression that, that would have happened without your diligent work, and just appreciate all that you've done and Senator Barrasso continues to do, as well as the whole congressional delegation to fight for our interests. So thank you once again.
Well, thank you so much and really appreciate your time.
Okay, next up, we have railroads and coal exports. Sorry, public input, public comment, my apologies. Okay, yes, as an oversight on my part, sorry. Public comment, please. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Garrett.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Richard Garrett, and I will be very brief, I promise. I don't think, well, Matt is still on. I want to thank Matt and Senator Barrasso for their continued work on behalf of Wyoming's energy future. I'd like to recall to the committee that Senator Barrasso, I think it was more than a dozen years ago, had a vision of carbon capture, direct air capture, that I think many were skeptical of at the time. I know I was one of those that was skeptical of its viability, but we're hearing more and more about that in the news in the last year or two. And last week at the Minerals Committee, as Representative Burkhart will recall. So absolutely agree, carbon capture, utilization, and storage is a vital part of our energy future and decarbonizing our climate. I'd also like to point out one last thing, and that is that so many companies in Wyoming are doing great work on leak detection and repair. They understand how important methane is to their bottom line, frankly, and the value of detecting leaks and repairing them in an efficient way. So that methane tax, if you will, that's anticipated to be imposed as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act may not be as impactful in Wyoming as it might be in other states that don't do it as well as our operators do in this state. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Appreciate that. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your input. Is there anybody online? I know I don't have anybody scheduled, but feel free to raise your hand digitally if you want to testify online. In the meantime, we'll go back to the room. Is there any additional public comment on this topic? Okay, if there's no online, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Committee, is there any comments, any action on this item? Nope. Okay, seeing none. Now we'll go as a follow-up to the topic at our previous meeting, dealing with some challenges with coal exports from the state, I guess, via railroad. So important topic. And unfortunately, the limiting factor last we heard in why we aren't able to produce more coal is some challenges the railroads have been dealing with. Certainly not unique to coal, but it's absolutely affecting an important part of our economy. So go ahead, Mr. Detai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Travis Detai with the Wyoming Mining Association. And I withheld myself from public comment on the last topic. I could sit up here and comment on that for an hour, but I don't think you allow swearing before your committee, so I forego doing that. Anyways, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, when my association presented at your last committee meeting, I apologize that I was not able to join you at that, but what you had tasked us with was coming back with a little report on the status of rail service in the Powder River Basin and in Wyoming in general. And I can tell you this, I will generalize because my industry is not monolithic. With the Powder River Basin coal producers, what we have seen since this summer is we have indeed seen a little bit of an increase in service in the Powder River Basin. It has gotten a little bit better generally. I say generally because I do have some operators that say they have seen little to no improvement, and one that even considers it worse. But generally, with all the operators up there, there has been an uptick in performance in the railroads. Communication has increased a little bit. And again, what we're experiencing in the Powder River Basin is more of an effect of anything of what the railroads are going through right now and some of the labor issues, which I'll only touch on briefly. And I think that we may have some folks from the railroads online to hit on that more. But overall, service has improved a little bit. And again, the frustrating thing, I think for all the operators, not only the coal operators, but our soda ash operators, is that we're doing pretty well, as I mentioned this morning. From the coal side of things, we could be doing better. If the railroads were at their best, as they were 5 or 6 years ago, moving the coal efficiently and reliably, we're going to miss out on upwards of 30 million tons of production. And that's a significant chunk of revenue for the state of Wyoming. And unfortunately, it just is what it is. And right now, given the situation with the railroads and their labor issues, we are preparing for a strike in November. November 18th has become the new September 18th. And a lot of that is up in the air. We're hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. I've been told on the coal side, again, if there is indeed a strike, they have stuff to do before they start sending people home, and that kind of will fall under turning towards reclamation, turning towards maintenance, and then it would just be a series depending on how long a strike event would last. On the Trona side, it's a little more difficult. Their timeline is a little bit shorter in the fact that they would, if they are not able to get trains, they have to shut down not only their mining operations, but their processing operations up top. And that, again, depending on the time frame, it takes up to a week or more to get those operations up and running again. And, you're talking a lot of money lost in a very competitive environment. So that's hanging over everything. But the general report back to the committee is service has improved a little bit, but it's not where we need it to be. It needs to continue to improve. I will touch on the export issue right now. We do have a couple of operators that are exporting, in theory. One operator out of their Montana mines and one operator out of Wyoming mines, to the tune of roughly, just shy of, I would say, 15 million tons, which is not a lot. Most of that is going off the West Coast out of Vancouver. And kind of an interesting development that has happened since events in Europe have transpired. Our companies are receiving inquiries about getting coal to Europe. And that's a really good thing. But again, the very big issue as to how you could take advantage of that is how you get it out of Wyoming to the East Coast. And again, that's a rail issue too. And the capacity to get it there is really questionable right now. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I promised Chairman Burkhardt I would be brief. In the interest of time, that's what I have to report, and I would stand for any questions.
Okay, any questions for the Mining Association? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Travis, you mentioned getting coal out of the East Coast. I know there's a coal port at Norfolk that the West Virginia mines use. Is it adequate capacity to handle additional coal from Wyoming? Now, most of theirs is to me, low volume metallurgical coal.
Met coal, yeah.
So
That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that, but I will look into that. I don't know about the capacity, but I think our biggest thing would be getting it there. Yep, getting it to that port and getting it out. And then I think the other part of the puzzle is the volume that they would be looking for.
okay.
Representative Winter.
Yes. In your estimation, what are the possibilities of shipping coal out of Texas? If we could get it to a Texas port, I would think they would be more than willing to help us out there and get it sent to Europe.
Mr. Chairman, I think that possibility is there. And as I said, these are kind of new inquiries right now. Traditionally, we haven't moved coal, off our East Coast or to Europe. And if we have, in the past, it's been very small amounts, but I think the opportunity is there. And I think you're seeing, I think companies are looking at it closely.
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Travis, looking at New Orleans, Port of New Orleans, they expanded their bulk terminal about 4 or 5 years ago, mainly with that in mind of being able to handle coal. But we still have to get it there, which means shipping it by rail. So I guess we'll hear from the railroad people here in a little bit on that. And I think I did the math one time, and one ship of coal going through the Panama Canal going to the Pacific Rim is close to $500,000 in transit fees. So,
And Mr. Chairman, the customer pays for that. And
Yes.
if you have customers, which we have seen significant interest from the Pacific Rim countries, and if they're willing to pay for that, I think it's logistically possible, if we can, get our railroads back on track. No pun intended.
Okay, any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we also have representatives of both the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad online. And so whoever wants to go first, looks like we have Nathan Anderson with UP and Matt Jones with BNSF. So we have Mr. Anderson, you're up first. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, we're here to provide an additional report to the update we provided in our previous meeting. So in terms of numbers, in September, we ran 456 trains from the Powder River Basin, and our October numbers are going to close out just below about 470 trains, which is up 122 and roughly 135 more trains respectively than we were moving in springtime when our cruise just started. We're moving about 109 trains a week, give or take, which is up 7% from our prior report. And that number represented a 15% year over year increase. So we are seeing much more coal moving. As Mr. Detai mentioned, there's more to move. We grew our dedicated train sets by 15% to 116 dedicated sets this fall. And we're going to add another 10% by the year end in order to gear up for our anticipated 2023 volume. We continue hiring, and we're on target to hire the 1,400 additional crew members we discussed in our previous report to this committee. Hiring in the region still remains a challenge, and about 25% of those who are hired system-wide don't make it through the 14-week training process for a variety of reasons. So we're working with those folks to find other roles for them. Say if they can't pass from a physical standpoint, from an intellectual standpoint, are there other areas in the railroad where they can work because they've demonstrated a desire to join our team. They have some degree of skills. They have willingness to find that career opportunity. As we look forward into winter, we have some risks to our winter shipment, and these are risks that the miners, the mining organizations have as well. Primarily personnel availability due to winter weather. Our personnel plan can be dramatically impacted by winter weather and by impassable roads. We had a planning call with the mining organizations and with WYDOT last week to discuss this. WYDOT is developing an aggressive plan. They have been hiring aggressively as well, and they find that they have some challenges in hiring because they can't be competitive with alternative employment opportunities. And they're looking for solutions to address that. I think likely the committee and members of the legislature are aware of those. But that does represent a different risk to our plan going forward, availability of getting our crews in the right place. And so we've identified some both communication aspects and some operational opportunities to keep our crews flowing in and out of the right areas. And that is my update on operating and commercial coal side. I know that when we met previously, there was some inquiry about Union Pacific's second chance hiring program, and at the committee's discretion, I'd be happy to provide an update as well.
Okay, any questions so far for UP? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Anderson, and I know that Mr. Jones is on, so keep this in mind for your portion. Is there anything the state of Wyoming can do to help?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, challenges in hiring continue to be our biggest obstacle. And so to the extent that there are opportunities to coordinate hiring, to point folks to career opportunities that exist with Union Pacific Railroad, we appreciate that. I think we are engaged with a variety of organizations, including community college, a training area that will address training, hiring, and career opportunities. So I think the message is out there that we're open for business on a commercial side, and we are hiring aggressively. And I'm not sure what more the state can do, but if you think of something that you think might be of value, I will take that to my workforce resources team and to my commercial team and let them know.
So, Mr. Anderson, just kind of thinking really off the top of my head, is there a way for our community colleges to provide, let's say, some of the, call it uniform training that every railroader would need to go to work for the railroad? They do that, for example, they do that at the mines. They'll provide the required mine safety training so that someone goes to work in the mines already has that training. Is there something that the community colleges can do like that for the railroads?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the thought in that arena. I think it will depend on what area we're trying to hire in. For example, right now, our train, engine, and yard, so we're talking about brake people, train people, conductors, and engineers. That training is fairly industry specific as opposed to more broadly, and it tends to be, I don't want to say better done, but has tended to happen on the job, right? Through our because of the Federal Railroad Administration training requirements that exist. It is something that I can ask our hiring and training folks about, and I just made a note to myself to do so.
Go ahead, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Anderson, does Union Pacific have a COVID vaccine mandate for its employees?
We do not have a COVID vaccine mandate out because, I'm trying to think what the status is right now. We do not have a COVID vaccine mandate right now.
Okay. Did you in the past?
We are a federal contractor, and when federal contractors were required to have a vaccine mandate, we did have a vaccine mandate in place.
And Mr. Chairman, Could that have been part of the reason why you're having some labor problems, is people left the company because of that mandate? And now they're probably not wanting to really come back since they were forced out?
I am not aware of anyone who was forced out, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah, appreciate that. I guess UP doesn't have too many employees in Douglas, but there's another one that I can tell you anecdotally, there were folks that did leave, because I know them personally. For that reason, I understand, there was a federal requirement too as well, but so just a more general update about, I guess the elephant in the room, and that's, feel free to talk as much or as little as you want about, but the status of the ongoing threat of a strike here, where do you see that going in the next couple of weeks? We're at the November 17th deadline. Anything you can share about that situation, I think would be beneficial for us to understand.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question as well. Regarding the strike, we continue to work with the unions. There are a number of ratification votes that are coming up over the next couple of weeks. We remain at the negotiation table in the context that the Presidential Emergency Board has provided a framework for moving those agreements to fruition, to moving those contracts to agreement status, and we believe that what the Presidential Emergency Board, has put in place is in fact a good compromise in terms of where the two sides are, and we are doing what we can to avoid a strike. It would not be a good situation for anyone if that were to happen.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further questions, committee? Okay, thank you for your time. Appreciate the improvement, and hopefully we'll continue to see some traction on this very important issue. Okay, next up we have Matt Jones. Welcome, sir, with BNSF. Feel free to provide your testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mr. Anderson, I think did a great job kind of summarizing where the industry is in terms of improving our service to the Powder River Basin, which is jointly served by BNSF and Union Pacific. And many of the statistics I have are very similar to Union Pacific, so I'm not going to repeat them, but I would like to just say that, we greatly appreciate Mr. Deta's update and the communications we have with the Wyoming Mining Association. October was our second best month of the year, despite a labor stoppage at the West Shore terminals in British Columbia, which shut down the export program for coal for more than 3 weeks. So that was a very challenging time. Again, that was in the end of September and beginning of October. Nonetheless, we were able to maintain a decent level of service for that month, but it's not where it needs to be. And we understand that. We're doing all the things that Mr. Anderson mentioned in terms of working with our customers and hiring. And I appreciate Chairman Burkhart's question. Getting the word out that the railroads are hiring and that they're great jobs. They pay very well. And when this labor agreement, as proposed by the Presidential Emergency Board, is finally in place, wages are going to end up going up by 24% over the term of that agreement. And it's they're great jobs, and we look forward to having that completed. One of the other questions that Chairman Burkhart raised, if it's okay that I address that, it's related to working with community colleges and whatnot. We've done that in the past, especially with the diesel training programs and industrial electricians. So some of the training that gets done at the community colleges around our network in those arenas are great foundations to then hire into the railroad where they still are part of an apprenticeship program through the unions and whatnot. So we always look forward to increasing the opportunities there. So with that, I would just like to say thanks again for the committee's attention to this matter. We do anticipate that we will finish 2022 up over 2021 by approximately 3%. Again, it's not where we want it to be, and we're going to keep working to improve those numbers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones. Any questions, committee? Okay, seeing none, looks like it benefits to go second here. So, yeah, appreciate your input, and hopefully, we can once again continue to see some improvement along these lines. But looking forward to that November 17th deadline getting past it. So, okay, any public comment on this issue? Okay, anybody online? Okay, anybody in the room? Last chance. Okay, public comment is closed. Committee, is there any action on this item that you'd like to see?
I don't think so.
No?
Just keep watching.
Okay. All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our next topic. Last topic for the day, natural gas storage facilities. Welcome to the committee. We have some folks online, but we have an in-person presence here, Mr. Jensen. Good to see you. And looking forward to learning about Spire Storage and some natural gas issues here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to make any presentation. I'm just here to introduce the CEO of Spire Storage West, Scott Smith. He's online. I believe there he is. Some of you may have met him. He was here about a year ago, just at the beginning of the session, and just he'll give you an update. But the main thing is appreciation for you and the members of this committee and other legislators and our senatorial staff, and as well as local legislators that were instrumental in helping the process to expand their Clear Creek project in southwest Wyoming in a little sooner fashion than what we were anticipating. So Scott will say that as well, but just wanted you to know from the perspective of Holland and I should introduce myself. I'm sorry. I'm Bob Jensen with Holland and Hart, and we represent Spire Storage West, and we're appreciative of your efforts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jensen. Mr. Smith, welcome to the Select Federal Natural Resource Management Committee. Please feel free to provide your testimony.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Scott Smith, I run our Spire midstream assets for Spire Inc., which incorporates the operation of our storage facility in Wyoming. And I'll provide you some more detail of our operations in a few minutes. I would like to thank you for inviting me to discuss underground natural gas storage and our growing investment in infrastructure in Western Wyoming. In my testimony today, I'd like to provide you with first an overview of Spire Storage's operation in Wyoming, the progress report, as Bob mentioned, of our expansion of our Clear Creek facility, and then finally just give you some perspective of our strategies and our thoughts around investment in energy infrastructure, in particular infrastructure around our storage assets. So with that, I'd like to at least first start with, again, to reiterate what Bob said, express my company's sincere gratitude for your past support of Spire Storage, in particular advocating to the FERC, or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to approve our expansion project. We are excited to report that our construction has started this summer. We're making significant investment. This process will take us several years to complete. But I'll get into more details about our project here in a few minutes. But again, would like to reiterate our appreciation for the efforts that you and your committee, as well as others within the state, have supported us to get to this point in our project. So starting with who is Spire and Spire Storage. Spire is the 5th largest publicly traded natural gas company in the United States. Interesting point, fact about Spire is it is the 8th oldest company to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It was listed as a company called Laclede, which is the St. Louis gas utility, and obviously we've expanded and grown since then, but it has a long history in the natural gas business. We own and operate interstate pipelines, natural gas storage facilities. We have a marketing, logistics, and trading business. And then we also serve communities in Alabama, Kansas City, St. Louis, Mississippi, and the general Mississippi Gulf Coast that has 1.7 million customers as a gas utility. So a fairly large footprint from the standpoint of gas operations, with obviously our facility here in Wyoming being the furthest west asset that we own and operate. Just as a reiterate of who Spire Storage is, as if you don't already know, we're an interstate natural gas storage facility. We operate 2 storage fields in depleted oil and gas reservoirs in southwest Wyoming near Evanston. We're basically off of State Highway 89, about 30 minutes north of Evanston. We are currently authorized by FERC to manage and operate roughly 93 BCF of storage capacity. So what that means is it's really storage you have to break down into 2 buckets. One is capacity that you can serve customers with, meaning space to move gas in and out of the ground to meet contract commitments. And then you have to have some supporting gas in the ground, which we call base gas, to allow that to happen. And so that 93 BCF is comprised of both buckets of activity. We're approved to provide roughly 55 or roughly half of that BCF of capacity to customers through our tariff services. The 2 storage fields, they've been in operations as storage assets for 10 plus years, if not longer. We call them the Belle Butte field and the Clear Creek field. Both of these are depleted oil reservoirs. Belle Butte field was originally operated by Amoco as a EOR project, oil EOR project with a gas cap. And then the Clear Creek facility was operated by Chevron in a similar fashion. There's some uniqueness, there are differences between the 2, but they're essentially both produced out of we use a nugget formation to store gas in. They're roughly 10 miles apart. So they're very similar from the standpoint of the geology that we use, but they're also very different for how we operate. The other thing that we also unique about our facilities, we have a third facility, which we call Canyon Creek, which is our compressor station that we are connected to. Both these facilities are connected to the compressor station and interconnected to each other as well to allow us to move gas between the storage facilities, but more importantly, to take gas off the interstate pipeline grid and for injection, or alternatively move it back into the grid on withdrawal. And I think that's what makes our facility so unique. We're connected to essentially the 5 largest interstate natural gas pipelines in the Western US. So we serve a very large and broad market region. The pipelines we're connected to include Kern River Gas Transmission, which moves gas into the Southwest all the way to the Los Angeles area. So it serves communities along that pathway, including the Las Vegas, Nevada area. We're also connected to Ruby Pipeline, which moves gas out of the general western Wyoming area near Opal, as well as connecting to our plant, obviously, into Northern California and serves predominantly the Northern California market. Also, we're connected to Northwest Pipeline, which serves the Pac Northwest, as well as some capacity to serve down into the New Mexico area. The 2 other pipes we're also connected to is Mountain West Pipeline, which is essentially the pipes serving but not only Evanston, but also into the Salt Lake area for gas customers there. And then lastly, the Mountain West Overthrust Pipeline, which moves gas supply coming in from the Rockies into the general western Wyoming area, Opal region, where it is then redistributed to the pipes I just mentioned. So those are the 5 interconnects that give us both access to supplies to the east coming out of the Rockies, as well as access to markets all up and down the western United States. I think this connectivity makes us very unique and differential. It's why we're obviously optimistic about our prospects and why we elected to move forward and invest in the expansion. This area of the country allows really a lot of unique kind of services that we can offer, given how the market is transitioning and changing, which I'll get into in a few minutes. But I think it provides a really unique and fundamentally different operating characteristics compared to other storage facilities along the western kind of up and down the West Coast, including those in other locations in Wyoming, Colorado, et cetera. Currently, Spire Storage employs a little more than 30 personnel, with the bulk of those being based in the Evanston area, operating the asset. So since we've bought the Spire Storage, we acquired both these facilities in 2017 and 2018 and been spending time and money to essentially improve operations, to effectively improve reliability, performance, prove out to the market, if you will, that we can provide these services and do so reliably. We've invested roughly $170 million on physical plant operations, safety, et cetera, to improve the capabilities of our facilities as they exist today, ensuring that we provide safety, safe operations, we're environmentally prudent, and we're efficient for providing these services to our customers. As I mentioned, we have started the expansion of our Clear Creek facility, which when we're completed, which will be in, I think, the 2025 timeframe, we'll spend roughly incrementally an additional $200 million to expand that facility. In that process, we started here this past 2 months ago, and we're bringing roughly 250 jobs into the region as we complete this expansion. The real heavy lifting from the standpoint of the project will start up next spring, during the spring and summer construction season in Wyoming for the bulk of the project. So more about what this expansion looks like, and maybe the process of how we got here. It's interesting. So we started this process in 2020, internally discussing the merits of expansion, and elected to file for an expansion to FERC in October of 2020. This facility and the size of the project requires FERC approval. It requires a 7C certificate to operate under these expanded capabilities. And so it required us to file at FERC to attain approval to expand the facility. And we basically were expanding Clear Creek from roughly its current operations of 4 BCF of working gas capacity to 20. We also, as part of this project, are going to increase the connectivity of our 3 facilities by building a pipeline that will move gas between these facilities that has much more larger capacity than what we currently have. And this will allow us to basically improve efficiency of operations of our 3 facilities, as well as provide what we believe is additional services into the market once our facilities are completed. Again, this is roughly a $200 million incremental investment to our current position. And it's one that it's taken quite a bit of work and effort to get to the point of approval and getting obviously the FERC certificate to get us there. The other interesting aspects about the project is we do produce condensate and NGLs as part of the process of withdrawing gas from the facility. And obviously with the production of that condensate and NGLs, we make payment back to royalty owners that have access to the mineral rights for those properties, which provides an incremental component of revenue to state and landowners within the state. When we started this process back in October of 2020, the interesting thing was we thought that to get approval would take us 9 months, 12 months tops, given the historical precedent at FERC. That turned out to be not the case. What typically would be expected is with the filing of a brownfield expansion of an operating facility, we would be required to complete environmental assessment, which typically is a fairly short window of time to complete and review. But what happened was ultimately FERC elected to prepare and ask us to support preparing a full environmental impact statement for the project. And environmental impact statement is one that takes a subsequently more work, involves more time for third-party input and intervention in that process. And essentially that took this 9 to 12 month process for approval to almost 19 months to approve. We obtained approval from FERC back in May. But I want to say that it could have been worse from our perspective from an approval timing if it wasn't for the fact that voices from elected officials in Wyoming supported our project and openly advocated through written testimony letters, whatnot, in DC, Washington, about our project to obtain approval, and really what we believe is moved approval of this project from potentially late 2022 into May. And we believe that happened largely, if not exclusively, from the support of those from Wyoming, both the state representatives, the governor, as well as our federal senators and representatives as well. So we're very much appreciative of that effort. So at this stage, what's interesting, when we went through the EIS process, was not clear to us whether FERC would essentially go through a process of reviewing the greenhouse gas emissions with the project and assign their social cost of carbon allocation of cost to mitigate those greenhouse gas emissions to the project, and which in turn would require us to mitigate that. That didn't happen, I think, in part because, as probably some of you already know, FERC was moving forward with a policy statement in the spring that would essentially adopt some mechanism to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions that was met with substantial amount of feedback from industry and others about the implications from that policy. And so they basically retracted it, and it's still under review. And we'll wait to see ultimately what that project or what that policy looks like. If that would have occurred, where we would have had assessment of mitigation requirements for greenhouse gas emissions, this project wouldn't be moving forward. Those costs can be substantial, can in some cases dwarf the capital expense associated with building facilities itself, when you look at the mechanisms and the costs that are imputed associated with that mitigation. So I'm fortunate that we had the ability to gain approval without that. And I think the other element is we're fortunate that currently FERC is not requiring mitigation for greenhouse gas emissions until effectively it determines where it's going to go with its policy statement. And that doesn't necessarily mean that ultimately they decide to do that longer term. But we are pleased by the fact that we did get the formal EIS approved, and that EIS statement basically said that there was no significant environmental impacts except for climate change, which the FERC does not characterize as significant. So that allowed us ultimately to get the EIS, which in turn drove to ultimately FERC approval in May of 2020. So now obviously we've got the approval. We filed for notice to proceed. We started construction in August. We're going to conclude our first phase of construction in November here in the next couple of weeks. There's already snow on the ground, so that creates some problems from the standpoint of things we can or can't do from a construction perspective. And then we'll shut it down until spring of next year and restart with the bulk of the project expansion. So what drove us from the standpoint of to move forward with the project, to elect to invest and spend the roughly $200 million of capital, is we believe that our strategy at Spire Storage, in particular with our western asset near Evanston, is to serve the evolving Western United States energy market. And so the energy market in the West, as many of you all know, is evolving to the increased mandates and increased amount of installation of renewable energy across the different states in the Western region. And we believe and we know natural gas through gas-fired generation coupled with natural gas storage provides the necessary reliability support for solar and wind due to the intermittent nature of those renewable sources. We also know that natural gas can provide as a hedge against high gas prices and gas price volatility to consumers and utilities in our region, which essentially will allow users to lower their natural gas costs by allowing injection into our facility when prices are low, typically this summer, and withdrawing gas out of our facility in the winter when prices typically are high or much more volatile. What's driving our strategy, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that we have this growth in renewables. Wind generation in the Rockies is growing exponentially. Renewable generation in California, predominantly solar, is growing substantially here over the next 10 years. Gas supply in the Western US is growing. However, it's different pockets. You're seeing growth in the Permian area, driven by growth that is kind of marginal or flat coming out of the Rockies in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. But bottom line, we believe the supply portfolio is there. And we believe that ultimately the flexibility is going to be required to help manage the intermittent nature of the renewable portfolio as it grows in the broader Western US market. We see demand in the Rockies growing roughly 5% by 2030. It's varied by different parts of the Western US market, but again, we see growth in the Pacific Northwest as well. That's obviously, you compare that to what we see is happening in California, where we see over the next 7 to 10 years declining consumption or demand for natural gas, just due to the repositioning and the reportfolio of the new portfolio generation that's occurring in the state itself. But we remain bullish on the opportunities to serve the Western markets and be an operator in Wyoming. We have obviously want to continue to expand, invest, and enhance our natural gas businesses. And we believe that the trends that are occurring are going to require services such that our Spire storage facility can operate and provide. We also believe that one of the elements that is important is obviously monitoring what FERC is considering from the standpoint of how it will evaluate and impose mitigation requirements for greenhouse gas emissions. If the decision ultimately is that natural gas companies must pay for mitigation damages equal to the damages calculated under the social cost of carbon greenhouse gas tool, then effectively the federal government has made every project uneconomic or worse economically, but too burdensome for some low income communities. We would encourage this committee to continue to communicate the impact of national policy has on the state, its impact on the natural gas industry, and the impact to potential projects like ours from the standpoint of ability to go forward, and ultimately the impact of cost to communities and consumers within the state itself. So in closing, I'd like just to give you a perspective of what our general view and our general strategy, our vision within Spire is. We believe that energy exists to help people to enrich their lives, grow their businesses, and advance our communities. It's a simple idea, but we define who we are, and it defines everything we do. With that, that concludes my testimony, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk to you all.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for that update. It's good to hear that you did have a positive outcome. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's interesting to hear about the importance of course, natural gas. I think it's going to be only increasing as we move forward, as you stated. So, any questions, committee, Mr. Smith? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Smith, we hear a lot that the natural gas storage is at some of the lowest levels it's been for a long time. How do you stand? Average, good, better than average?
Well, there's, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, there's quite a few different dynamics in that answering that question. And you can look at it on a national basis, and nationally, surprisingly, we've made as an industry, a pretty substantial comeback here in this last month from the standpoint of storage inventories. They aren't up to typical averages, but they've increased substantially here of late. And if you've paid attention to natural gas prices, they were peaking at $8, $9, and now they're down to around $6 depending on the location. And that's driven in part due to the storage inventories filling back up. That doesn't mean that we're back to normal, but we've made good progress as an industry refilling storage levels as a whole. Relative to Spire Storage, we are roughly in the same general range we were last year at this time. We have the ability to move our inventory up or down depending on the commitments we have at the facility and depending on what the market conditions are. But we essentially are similar to where we were last year. And we are anticipating arguably probably a slightly more withdrawals this winter as compared to last, in part due to Co-Chairman Burkhart, your comments about the overall inventories across the country and the expectation there's going to be more than likely a harder pull on storage inventories across the U.S., in particular in our facility this upcoming winter.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, I just have one, we don't hear about FERC too much on this committee. And so just, I'm just wondering if you interact with any other state or federal agencies and how that compared with your experience with FERC. And maybe even, it sounds like you're almost sort of taken by surprise that they want to do the EIS. Is there a reason for that that you can tell? Was it due to personnel within the local office? Was it just a little bit more of a debrief, I guess, so we can be aware of what the challenges may be moving forward for similar types of activity?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So the EIS process was driven exclusively by FERC and the FERC staff, and is pretty much becoming a standard part of any new application for construction and expansion at FERC. That obviously hasn't been the case. It has been driven by more the potential impacts of a project. If it was viewed as having substantive impacts environmentally, that pushed a project to an EIS, but in many cases or most cases, a less complicated or less robust environmental assessment process was sufficient. We don't see, organizations, regulatory agencies in the state of Wyoming, as an example, pushing for greater assessment from, or are pushing for EIS. It's more just a matter of reacting to ultimately what FERC asked us to do in this process. And we were probably one of the first ones out of the box, if you will, in going through this process at FERC. Given the timing of the FERC commissioner, the new administration, and the Biden administration coming in, and a whole host of factors that drove at what we believe is transitioning out of the traditional method that they use to the process that we went through, and the process that the lion's share of gas projects that require FERC oversight and approval are going to receive. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the support that we received from representatives from the state, the governor, Senator Barrasso, made a huge impact in influencing the timing to get our project approved. I think that's going to be that type of interface and type of dialogue with regulators in Washington around energy projects, I think has to continue, just given the importance that energy has in our economy. The importance of having domestic energy as a main supply to meet needs within our country as a whole. So I can say it really is a federally driven process that drove the requirement. Nothing happened on a state or local level that would have influenced it to the negative. I think just the opposite. I think the state and local level was very supportive of what we were doing and what we filed for, and as well ultimately had approved by FERC.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Any further questions, committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Thanks for the follow-up, Mr. Smith, and glad to hear it worked out for you eventually.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any further public comment on this topic? Anything online, Mr. Fuller? Okay, public comment is closed on this topic. Any further discussion, committee? Okay, well, that takes care of the agenda. Anybody, if there's anything else that we have, now's the time. This is our last meeting for the interim, just to be clear. I think we've taken care of all our business. And looks like just about all, all the folks here are going to be back in January, it looks like. So I'll see you there. Any further discussion or comments? Okay, well, appreciate your work over this.